but to all of the people who have joined the Zoom event today. We are so thrilled to have a very large crowd of people who are joining this call. And for those of you who didn't hear a little bit of discussion that we were having earlier, we're all talking about how much more of this we're doing, how we're making do in the time of limited travel and less travel, and that these kinds of meetings actually are becoming more the norm than the exception. And we're all learning a lot and able maybe to get more done because of the ability to do this. So I think I'm on the page of so far so good. And I will begin with just a couple of introductions. And the very first thing I want to say is how honored we are to have with us today John Chambers. I'm going to introduce John just a little further after I say some just very brief opening remarks, which is to say that this event today is yet another in a series, a virtual series that we're calling the West Virginia Business Summit Virtual Series. And we're doing it virtually because we couldn't meet in person. And we've been honored to have join us on previous weeks Brad Smith, who kicked off the program, and John, about whom I know you want to say more a little later. Dr. Gordon Gee and Dr. Marty Roth did a session for us on the issues facing higher education. Last week, we were honored to be joined by Shelley Moore Capito, United States Senator Shelley Moore Capito, and Jim Martin, who talked about broadband, the importance and need for expanding broadband, where the opportunities are, what the challenges are, and how we can go about speeding up the broadband expansion process in West Virginia. I want to give special thanks to Dr. Javier Reyes for really helping us put this event together. It's always such a pleasure to have the opportunity to work with Dr. Reyes. I just turned it off. My apologies to all. I saw that happen to Joe Manchin in front of a crowd, and that's how he handled it. So I thought that's how I would handle it too. My apologies. Let me move farther. Dr. Reyes is the Milan Puskar Dean of the John Chambers College of Business and Economics at West Virginia University. West Virginia University's College of Business and Economics is home to more than 2,900 undergraduate and graduate students with 105 faculty members and 55 staff members. Dr. Reyes serves as Vice President for a startup of West Virginians to strategically engage and coordinate campus-wide and statewide efforts to affect implementation of initiatives and investments to diversify and grow West Virginia's economy. I have brief introductions for both of you. There is so much more that could be said, but I know that all of those on this call would want to have just at least a little reminder about who we are and where we've been. So I'll continue with another sentence or two about Dr. Reyes, even though there's so much more that I could say. From 2003 to 2016, he served in simultaneous roles at the University of Arkansas, both as Vice President and Provost for Distance Learning, very timely at this particular time, and Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies and Executive Education at the Sam Walton College of Business, and a full Professor of Economics. He earned his PhD in Economics from Texas A&M, and he lives in Morgantown with his wife and two sons, and I know at least one of them is a basketball player because I've been with him when he was eager to get to a son's basketball game. Something that I think John Chambers and I have in common is that we used to like to bounce the basketball some. So I'll never say that I was very good, but I did used to enjoy it. We're also so pleased and honored to have with us John Chambers, who was the executive chairman and CEO of Cisco for over 25 years. During his period at Cisco, he helped grow the company. This is a phenomenal statistic. From a $70 million in sales in 1991 to over $47 billion in sales when he stepped down as CEO approximately 5 years ago. During John Chambers' time as executive chairman and CEO of Cisco, they acquired over 180 companies to be part of the Cisco family. I think it's important to note that after stepping down as Cisco executive chairman in December 2017, John launched JC2 Ventures, and in his current role as founder and CEO of JC2 Ventures, he's investing in and helping 18 startups grow and come to scale. But there's a lot more to be said. I'm only hitting some of the highlights. In addition to investing in and mentoring startups, John is focused on promoting entrepreneurship, gender equality, I think that's important, and accelerating overall new business creation around the world. He is the author of the book, Connecting the Dots, Leadership Lessons for a Startup World. He was appointed global ambassador of French tech by President Emmanuel Macron of France. He is the chairman of the U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum, and Prime Minister Modi unofficially calls him the global ambassador of India. That's important to us. I will quickly say that here at the West Virginia Chamber, we have recently welcomed 2 delegations from the Embassy of India, and we look forward to having more such interactions with our brethren in India. John has received numerous awards for his leadership, including being named best performing CEO in the world by Harvard Business Review. He has received the Edison Achievement Award for Innovation. And Javier, Reyes, I know you're wondering if I'm going to get around to what probably many of us think is his most important accolade, which is that he was born and raised right here in West Virginia, proudly considers Charleston, West Virginia to have been his home and the place where he learned so many of his lifelong and well-served values. He holds BS, BA, and law degrees from none other than West Virginia University. I want to turn this program over immediately to Dr. Reyes and to John Chambers with our great thanks and gratitude for a fireside chat. So with that, I'm going to remind everyone to please mute out so that we don't have a lot of interference in the background. Sometimes I forget to do that, so I think it's not offensive at all to remind each of us to please mute out. And let's hear from our very welcome and very esteemed speakers today. Thank you, gentlemen, for doing this and for joining us. You are on live.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate the introduction and really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with John, with this great audience and really put this event forward. And John, I'm going to really try to bring up some questions that I think with your global mindset and experience, you can provide us with a different perspective perhaps and a unique one on how we can move forward. So there's an obvious question right now that everybody's facing, and COVID-19 is forcing us to work in many different ways, and it's changing our world, and it's making us pivot every day. But how serious this is? I mean, if we can just get first your assessment of how serious this is, or what are the true challenges that we should be paying attention to? That would be a great start, I think, for the conversation.
Well, Javier, it's my honor to be with you. And Steve, thank you for such kind words. Steve was a better shot than I was, but I still keep trying a little bit. The phenomenon, the challenge we find ourselves in, we've never seen before as a country or as a world. This is my 6th economic challenge over the last 35 years. It is my 5th pandemic issue, although by far and away the worst. And it's my 3rd major supply chain issue. And what's happening, Javier, is all 3 are happening at a faster and faster pace than we've seen. So as this occurs, there's going to be tremendous disruption and a lot of real challenges. We all understand the pain of losing a job and or much worse, losing a loved one to a pandemic issue. But we also see the emotional drain that it has on everyone. Even the most optimistic people of the world, you occasionally find ourselves saying, whew, when are we going to get through this? And my parents were both doctors. They trained me from the very beginning to not wish the world was different. Focus on what you can change. So deal with the world the way it is, and then focus on the good things you can change and how you help others get through it. So I think moving to the requirements, and I would argue the opportunities from a business perspective or even a state perspective, you have to align with the new reality. So that means in terms of revenue, it means in terms of jobs, in terms of prioritization becomes very, very key. And for those business leaders on the call, you have to do scenario planning A, B, and C, in terms of an A being probably not going to do as well as you were doing before, B being it's going to be very tough, and C being it's going to be even worse. And then you adjust to it. You try to make those changes one time and quickly on the cycle. And out of my 18 companies, all of them have already made those changes back in March, April for it. And then you do what I think is so important to do as a state, as a country, as a business leader, is you transition to what the future is going to be. And you not only point to your North Star, you say, here are the programs that will get us to the North Star. And I'm a believer in dreaming, but I also am a believer in making dreams come true. And they only come true, you're lucky, is a definition of when opportunity meets preparation. So I think this is a terrible series of events that we all wish we could avoid. However, given that we're there, I think we've got to say, how do we deal with it in a realistic fashion? And then how do we also use these challenges to do the reverse? I think it is a third, next generation, if you will, opportunity for West Virginia. If we go after it as a state, as a startup state, and with a philosophy of inclusion in that philosophy that will benefit all of our citizens. So that's kind of, Javier, what you and I and Gordon and Brad and everybody's working on, the governor and speaker of the House and the president of the Senate. It's the most united I've ever seen our state toward a common goal. And Shirley Moore Capito and Senator Joe Manchin, both of them are heavily involved in this transition as well. So I've never seen the state united like this. And so this is the opportunity in front of us. It is severe, as you hear. Probably 50% of the large companies won't exist in a decade, both here and around the world. Normally that would only run about 20% on it. And a number of the startups will fail. And that's one thing unique about Silicon Valley is a failure isn't viewed as a negative thing. It's a red badge of courage. So when I look at leaders, I want people who have been bumped around and got up and moved forward.
And John, you mentioned a couple of times in your answer, your response is the word through. We have to get through it. We have to play through it. We have to plan through it. When you're talking to small businesses, you're talking to your startups, or you're talking to CEOs or presidents, how do the message of getting through gets sort of channeled through their teams? How can they lead in that message?
So I'm a believer in replicatable playbooks. Part of that I learned at West Virginia in the university. And part of it just whether you do acquisitions, 180 of them, and most people would say we did them better at Cisco than anybody in high tech, or how you digitize a country, or how you move into new product arenas, you get a playbook that you run. In crisis management, it's exactly the same. You want to, number one, be realistic. How much of it was introduced by the market? And a lot of it was, but very often there were also things that a company or a leader were not doing as well as we needed to, and you've got to address both at the same time. I like then to have 5 to 7 platforms that you run to deal with the crisis. The first one is survival, and that's around cash generation, cash preservation, the head count and resources you can have. Then the second is all around customers, and how do you focus especially on your existing customers, because that's sales, and to protect the renewals, et cetera, go with it. And then how do you think about acquiring new customers? The third area that I focus around is always about the employees. And as the employees, how do you communicate with them very openly, the challenges? How do you get them to share their ideas with how you navigate through it? How do you empower a group so they see what their expectations are and how they can move to the end goal? And then I sort into several other categories as well. Then you communicate regularly with all the stakeholders, whether it's your shareholders, your employees, your customers, your partners, etc., very transparently, listen to the criticism, and you paint a picture of what your North Star looks like when you come out. Then I like to call it the Silicon Valley or the Texas two-step. You pivot then, once you've got your operation in line, you pivot to how are you going to break away and survive and grow in the new world that you exist in. And while it's so easy to fall back and wish things are different, as my parents taught me, you got to deal with the world the way it is. And then as Gordon would say, there are opportunities even in the most challenged of times, and there are clear opportunities for West Virginia, in my opinion, to emerge out of this a much stronger state, more inclusive state in terms of economic growth, more inclusive in terms of age and gender and color of people's skin, etc., for the future. So I'm excited about our opportunities. So I moved after February to focusing on the future. And I don't expect everybody to agree with what I've said today, but my role was to challenge people and to say what we could potentially do together.
Thank you, John. And I'll just remind everyone, as you can start submitting your questions. We're going to get to them in a few minutes, but please feel free to submit your questions through the chat and the Q&A in Zoom. But John, you mentioned something, and even before the call started, you sort of alluded to it, and in your response, you just said it again, is this might be a time that this could be an inflection point. This might be a time in which it could be perhaps in February, perhaps earlier, where people need to see it as a possibility of an inflection point. Brad Smith, Ray Lane, others have seen that it can be a possible inflection point for the state of West Virginia. If you can talk about sort of the inflection point at a world scale, the inflection point in the state of West Virginia, how we are trying to position or how we can position ourselves in it, I think would be a great contribution.
So during times of challenging, I think it's important to continue to dream, but dreams only come true if you put the effort and the plans to help them to come true. And so I always like to start at the biggest picture of all and then explode down through it in terms of what that could mean to your question in terms of our home state. And so if you look on a global basis, many countries were already moving toward a digital country, a digital France, a digital India. Most companies were moving into a digital architecture, if you will, a completely connected data, voice, video like we're using today, implementation. And we dreamed at Cisco of each market we went into becoming one or two, and we did in 16 of 18 major product areas. But we did it by running that playbook around acquisitions and other things pretty crisply. When you start to think about a digital country, let's use France as an example. France was probably the worst place in Europe 5 years ago to establish jobs and to do a startup. And yet, once the country decided to change, and it was President Hollande, then a tremendous effort by President Macron about changing the country and dreaming it could be the startup nation in Europe, which nobody thought when we said it was going to be. Literally 5 years ago, we started on this effort, and the innovation engine for Europe, and yet it is today. Their number of startups are up 5x in terms of the venture-backed operations, and that is time that most startups around the world have decreased in the last 5 years. India, with 1.3 billion people, Prime Minister Modi has an architecture of a digital India, and I'm honored to be in many ways a informal advisor on this, and he breaks it down into segments that India has to do to achieve these goals in terms of startups, digital manufacturing, digital healthcare, education, the environment. And he's running a playbook that I think you'll see the strongest economic growth over the next decade in the world, and the per capita increase per household in family income doubling at least every 10 years, probably every 7 years under his implementation. So this is a playbook that works. We know that it does. And yet our nation, for a combination of reasons, has not dealt with it as a total nation. And so I think there's an opportunity to deal with it as a state and say, how do we gain control over the factors we can control and influence and not waste cycles on things we can't change? And how do we position the state for what it can look like in 3 and 5 and 10 years out, and to understand the unique opportunities that these terrible events have given us? And then how do we have the courage to move on 7 or 8 different platforms at the same time to get the results? So what West Virginia University is doing or Marshall University is doing in terms of changing the curriculum. And Javier, what you're championing is not just entrepreneurism for every student, but breaking down the silos in the university and focus on outcomes. And then to get a startup community modeling it after France, Station F, that if you read about it, 3,000 startups are in one big train station. And what you all did with Vantage Ventures and a small image of that at the university to begin to capture the imagination of startups. And then to outline dreams of how does each person play a role in achieving these dreams of our state. And rather than saying, let's think incrementally, which almost never gets the job done, let's think exponentially. Let's cross the chasm and say, what could we really do? How do we become one of the most desirable states for startups? What do we have to change? It starts with education. That's always where startups tend to congregate around the universities. It then starts with, how do you have a startup mentality? How do you bring in venture capital? And you mentioned Ray Lane, prior Oracle #2 and head of a major venture capital firm. And how do you get CEOs like Brad Smith, who cares about our state so much and is so generous both of his time, his finances, and resources to help dream, and use the leverage of his company and giving back to also say, how does the state transform? Then you need to get some successes, and you've got to be willing to risk failure. And we'll see how this Hyperloop thing plays out or not in the future, but we would have never even made a run at that. And there's 17 major states and regions going after it. We'll see how it plays, but our ability to get everybody to come together toward a common goal and to dream what's possible and to know we may fail. But if you're trying to do something others have not done, you've got to realize failure is an option, and then you just crack through it. So I think if we really come together, we can completely transform the state. We can think of a series of startups throughout all parts of the states. It is so advantageous. Young people today, 81% of the people in San Francisco with the startups are now thinking about leaving and saying, why shouldn't I be in a remote location that I really enjoy and caters to my outdoor interest and fast water rafting and canoes and biking and rock climbing and fishing. And West Virginia could be that destination location for many of the people out of a Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, the South, et cetera, of a location to do that and to get startups going together. So any of these by themselves don't move the needle. But if we do them all together, if we have the courage to dream and make dreams come true, and the courage, as Gordon is our champion in so many ways, to say, let's not set our goals too low. How do we go for it, and how do we transform things? So that's my dream. I know it's a stretch, but I have a lot of weaknesses, especially with the English language. I'm dyslexic, as many of you know, but I am good at seeing around corners and saying when there's a market transition there, if we execute right, we could really do this to the benefit of all the people in our state, and then be the model for the rest of the nation.
And I think you just put the next question we have in line really on the table, John, is you're talking about something that some people say it sounds like a dream, but you and others in very recently have actually engaged very closely with the state, either with their universities like you with us, as well as Brad with Marshall, but then also bringing people through your networks, as well as the alumni networks of both university. It seems that there is something different right now. You refer to that, how the leadership is aligned. You refer to the Speaker of the House. You refer to the congressional delegations. You're talking about President Gia and President Gilbert. You're talking about a lot of leadership with the governor being really moving at unison, perhaps. Is that the reason why you think now there is a platform on which the state can move forward and lead part of the nation and be an example? Is this a time that you've been waiting for and that you see it as a possibility now?
I think it's a time when we can come together, and the timing is actually perfect. Steve was talking earlier about a session of the business summit done in the mid-90s. And I remember it vividly because I had the opportunity to come in from Cisco and talk about where the internet was going at a time that most people didn't grasp how the internet would change every aspect of our lives, the way you work, live, learn, and play. And Steve was complimentary, saying, John, we really enjoyed having you there, but it was like you were from a different planet in terms of what you were talking about. And people grasp about half of what you said at the time. And because I was in Silicon Valley, we got to see that earlier. And Steve, I remember the picture. I think it was actually Governor Underwood, but it might have been Governor Moore. It was Jay Rockefeller and Sharon, my dad and mom, myself and Elaine there. And the picture is just one that I remember because it was at a transition opportunity for the state that for a combination of reasons, we did not go for. And as you know, what happens with the Amazons of the world, what happens with every company becoming digital and networked, et cetera, we missed that window and we weren't ready. This time, I think we are ready. I think you've got leaders, and the governor has been amazing at this, and support from Washington of both parties as well, that gives us a chance to go for this. And this time, we're all united. And what is so cool about our state is every time I've reached out, and Brad, I'm sure you've seen the same thing, and Javier, when I reach out and ask people to be involved, no one's ever said no. I've never seen that before in my life. There is something about West Virginia that people hold a fondness for. And I think it's our people down deep that others want to see be successful. So whether it's all the way from India with some of the top professors from the IITs, or from France at Polytechnique, or from Stanford with John Hennessy, the prior president, or any of the business leaders we asked to get involved or consider, they're in as well. So we have an ecosystem forming that I think can be very powerful. I'm realistic that if we don't move fast and we don't work together, we'll miss our window. But it is something that I think is different than is occurring in any other state in the US. Different than any other state. And we have the natural assets, and we wish COVID hadn't occurred, but people now want to be remote. They now want to be where they can exercise and enjoy their life as well as work around the world. And what we've all learned, you know, we talked earlier, I'm on 7 to 15 Zoom, Google Hangouts, Skype, WebEx sessions a day all over the world. I start usually in Europe and then end up in India, or vice versa in terms of the timing overall. So where you work can suddenly vary. So if we can do the education right, if we can create the right government and business environment that startups want to come here, that we know we've got to earn that, and we put the welcome out, and then we create the environment that allows them to scale more. And we create, both in West Virginia and in Marshall, the energy and the excitement around startups, and nurture them and change our curriculum to generate the skills that our leaders need to form these companies, then why not West Virginia? I mean, when I started talking about France, people looked at me and said, John, you've got most transitions right, but France, you're just going to be wrong on this one. And yet they crushed it. It's amazing how you can make dreams come true, as Shimon Peres, from the late president of Israel, taught me over 20 years ago. My regrets in life are usually that I don't dream big enough, not that I dream too big.
Well, and I think that is the key, the dreaming big. And you were talking, as we were talking about inflection points, I'm going to start bringing in some of the questions of the audience as well, because I think they pertain to the conversation we're having really closely. And one comes from Roger Henshaw, who you know very well. And
yes, I do.
And
a tremendous Speaker of the House and one of our champions. Roger, thank you so very, very much. We could not do this without you.
That is definitely correct, and I think his question is very, very, very zeroing in into something that I think you wanted to talk about. Is we talked about inflection points, and sometimes inflection points can be defined as an opportunities where you can leapfrog your competition if you see it ahead of time. His question is, what are the areas in which we can do that leapfrogging? Is there a place or is there a focus we can have in West Virginia that could leapfrog or allow us to leapfrog others and put us at the head of the competition? If you bear with me just 30 seconds, there's a question also by Steve Roby, who is the chair of the Chamber, West Virginia Chamber, where he's trying to say, focusing even more, saying, are there two things that are very important for us to really take advantage of and be able to leapfrog? What are the two things that we should focus on?
I'm going to draw the parallel. Let's assume that we're going to do a startup state. And let's assume that big companies in total will not add any headcount over the next decade because of automation, digitization, which I think is going to be true, and a large number of them will disappear. You then got to say, much as you look at startups that you're going to invest in, what are the sustainable differentiation the state has? And then what are the potential sustainable differentiation we can build together? And I don't deserve this, but I can pick any startup I want in the world, and they'll let me invest at very, very favorable terms because of my history and experience and mistakes made. And you're more a product of your mistakes than your successes about how do you grow them. So first thing I look at, is there a market in transition? And what are the sustainable differentiation this startup state brings? I think the sustainable differentiation are in two categories. I think our state's natural resources, our water. My dad was a believer that after coal, water should be the next major resource for West Virginia that can help change our economic environment. The rivers and the lakes and the streams, the beautiful mountain climbing, the hiking trails, the bikes, all that suddenly has moved to mainline. And before, you couldn't come and work in West Virginia and do your job in New York or do your job in Chicago or San Francisco or Pittsburgh. Now you can, because we've all realized it's actually more productive to do this virtually than physically and traveling around. So I think we've got to play to our state's natural capabilities. And then I meant the thing about it's an unusual culture. I say if I were to ever run off a road in the middle of the night and be in trouble and have to go up and knock on somebody's door, I hope I'm in West Virginia, because they will help you. And I was telling that story to the dean of business school in Indiana, and she said, John, oddly enough, my car broke down in West Virginia at 5 o'clock in the evening, and some nice man out of a garage that was just shutting down stayed with me, fixed my car, took many hours, and got me back on the road. And where I'm leading you is there's something unique about the people and the spirit. You know, I have the West Virginia football up here, and what Coach Brown is doing is very, very exciting. There is an ability to capture the imagination and to dream. There is no other state in the U.S. that has their governor, their Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate, and both Democrats and Republicans in both groups going the same way. Both senators, one Democrat, one Republican, going the same way. Two universities that are saying, we're going to change this state together, and having the courage to dream. And then you are able to tap three of us who had the good fortune of being educated in West Virginia and who really understand technology. All three of us are committed to saying how we change. And you've got two presidents of universities who are willing to change the curriculum, who are saying, how do we attach this? And then you've got people like Sarah Biller that you hired to bring in to help run this whole concept, how we do it differently. What I'm saying is that you have a community that for the first time I've ever seen it in this country is completely united, that we need to change. We have no choice. To continue on status quo, we all understand is a very disastrous outcome. And we're not going to just dream together. We're going to take the risk, and we're going to make some mistakes, and we're going to get criticized when we make mistakes, but that's okay. That's part of learning. And we are able to bring it together. So what I'm saying is it's the timing is right. Our natural resources, our wonderful state is perfect for people that want to work, quote, remotely, but that will be the new physical locations, and the ability to bring our state united together where we have a common vision rather than people arguing back and forth trying to say who gets credit. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. And then we're learning to dream, and that we did not have in 1995 when we did that session before. Everybody was excited about the technology and curious, but nobody said, all right, let's change. This time it's the reverse. There is huge impetus to change and to lead, not just to help West Virginia. We can be the model for the whole rest of the nation if we do it right. So those are the three aspects I would say. Our natural beauty and resources, the uniqueness of our people, united maybe for the first time ever in a vision that we can really make a difference and willing to take the risk on it, and the timing of events that we wish we could have avoided, but actually they are all playing to our favor. So that's what I think is unique for Roger, who asked the question, and the other individual who asked the question as well.
Very good. It was Steve Roby, a good friend also of the college and the state. So, and John, I would say there's two pillars in which I'm an economist. You're an economist as well by training, so I think you'll understand this. There's two pillars in which you usually stand. One is your investment and your infrastructure as a state, and the other one is your workforce. So there's a question in the audience that I want to talk about the workforce, but before I get to that one, I wanted to ask you, Brad has also been very vocal about this, that there is one infrastructure in which we cannot just not invest, and it's our access to broadband.
Yes.
You heard that was part of the speaking engagement from a previous session in the chamber. What are your thoughts? I mean, you're a person that changed the world through the internet.
Yes.
And right now, the internet and access to it is such a key component of the vision that you just put in front of us. Tell us a little bit about our broadband and how do we get the ball moving in that area?
Well, my parents taught me that the equalizer in life was education. And it wasn't a question of would we go to college. It was a question of how long we would go to college was the only given. And that was true, but you had to be in the right location. What the internet did is all of a sudden broke down the borders. And suddenly, if you had the right education, and it started an approach that you could do so much around the world, whether it's manufacture your products like you were in one location everywhere in the world, or how you do customer support from all over the world with different centers, et cetera. So I think the infrastructure that everyone's referring to is how do we bring broadband at scale across our state? And we've got to be practical. There's some economic locations that fixed line broadband is not going to be an option. So I'm a huge believer in mobile broadband with a small but powerful interstate-like connections that tie together the various locations, and then you use the mobile broadband that goes with it. So I think we need a policy and program, again, for how do we work together in public-private partnerships to get that broadband built out, and look for also companies that might be willing to help us do that for both economic, but also for society reasons, where it's about do you bring benefit to your society as well as economic return of your company to the results. So I do think we need to do that and do it effectively. Then the other pivot we got to make, we've got to get a bunch of startups going, and we've got to get some early successes so people have a chance to turn a dream, i.e. hope, into, hey, this is possible. My gosh, it's probable. And we're doing it, and then we accelerate through. Once you get the momentum, it's like winning in November in football. Once you begin to do it, you can keep driving it again and again and again, and once you learn how to dream. And I don't think West Virginia needs to take a backseat to anyone. You know, and you have three individuals who've been remarkably lucky and successful in high tech at the very high end of their jobs, but we were all three trained in West Virginia. So we can compete with the best of them. So those would be the areas that I think we need to focus on. Again, my job is to throw out ideas and not tease about it, but how do we sort through which ones make traction, what people buy into? But what we cannot do is move slow. What we cannot do is not take risk. What we cannot do is do the right thing too long, like we did in the 90s at that business summit where we saw what was going on, but we didn't have the courage nor the fear to move. I think we now understand that if we don't change in West Virginia, the outcome for our children, our children's children is unacceptable. So let's have the courage to dream, and let's take a chance to move.
Yeah, I know that Steve wanted to jump in with a question, and then I'll go back to the question about the workforce if it's not the one that he's talking about. So
it's probably a little bit different, but John, you've touched on an issue that I think is very important. It's a little bit personal. I'm going to warm you up a little bit before I take you there by telling you that I had the honor and pleasure of knowing both of your parents, Drs. Chambers and Chambers. And is it too personal to ask you a little bit about your K-12 education? Perhaps the role that your parents played, and how you experienced learning as a person with dyslexia. You raised the topic, and I think it might be very meaningful for us to hear a little about that.
Yes, I used to never talk about dyslexia because I considered it a major weakness. And my parents both were sure I'd be fine through school and they'd read with me each night, but candidly, it's like a golf swing that is really messed up. All you do by practicing is make it worse. And a teacher by the name of Mrs. Anderson, that they didn't even have the term dyslexia, helped me learn how to change. And she taught at first just so I could read and move forward. And remember, dyslexics read backwards. If you ever have a panel of dyslexics, we can almost finish each other's sentences because we think uniquely on it. And then you learn how to take your weakness and make it a strength, because dyslexics have to see the whole picture, how it ties together. So if you talk to a Charles Schwab or Richard Branson at Virgin areas, you see a thought process that is unique on it. I only started talking about it because a young girl would take our children to work day back at Cisco almost 17 years ago, tried to ask a question with 500 people in the room, and she broke down in tears and moved away from the microphone and said, "I'm dyslexic," and started crying to go back to her seat. And my heart went out to her. And even today, my hands sweat when I talk about it. But I followed her off stage, and I kind of ignored the audience for a while. And I went to where she was and got down on my knees and basically said, I'm dyslexic too. And I said, here's how you handle it. Just think of the concept. Do not memorize it because you'll mess it up. And don't try to read it because you're going to lose your spot. But just talk to me like you were talking to your father, who was there sitting beside her, and ask me the questions. So I started back up on stage. The whole audience was really quiet. And I realized I'd left my mic on, my lavalier mic. And so I disclosed what I thought was my biggest weakness in life. And as it turned out, I got more compliments about the openness of that. And then I started speaking about the ability to see the picture. So to your question, because a teacher was willing to help me, and my parents had confidence, I got through that. And then what most dyslexic will tell you in business, such Chuck Schwab or Richard Branson, they'll tell you they use it to their advantage now because they're able, and they have to. You have to see your whole picture, because if you do it a step at a time, you get lost on directions. Now back to your education question. Public schools all the way through in West Virginia. And the Charleston High School, we could compete with any high school in the nation in terms of our math skills, et cetera, on it. I worry today that our K through 12 system is really struggling and we're not competitive. So how we get the education system fixed at the same time and how we have the courage to change the university system, I think are very important to our future. So I don't know if that was what you were after, but that was my attempt to hit the areas that you asked me on.
Yes, and I think it's a part of the same question, John, when it comes to, we're seeing the south part of the state that presents various serious challenges when it comes to unemployment rates that we're seeing there with the shift in the industrial landscape that is happening in the state.
Yes.
But we could lose a couple of generations of West Virginians to this kind of dynamics. how can we turn it around? You talked about education, we talked about infrastructure. What are other alternatives and options that we can work together with universities, community colleges, K through 12 corporations to engage that population that workforce that we don't want to lose?
Well, when we lose a workforce, we lose generations, or equally as bad, we train them very well and then they have to leave the state because there are no jobs. So it really comes down, we got to create the jobs. And the large companies, and we might find exceptions, aren't going to be the job creators. It's going to be startups and small companies. So I think we have to become the best in the nation at doing startups. And why not? 80% of the people that are in New York City or in Seattle or in Silicon Valley now want to leave and to have a different lifestyle, still be involved with technology. And remember, every company will be a technology company. It doesn't matter if you're an outdoors company. It doesn't matter if you're a biking company. It doesn't matter if you're a transportation company. Every one of them will be enabled by technology. So if we can change our curriculum at West Virginia Marshall to be one of technology-based and business-based, regardless of if you're a doctor, or if you're a lawyer or liberal arts, but make that part of the fabric. And then we create an environment where all of a sudden we slowly become the best incubators of startups at our two great universities. And then you grow. The model is very simple. Polytechnique in France has turned from where all the graduates used to go work and it's the top, in my opinion, engineering school in Europe, but they used to go work for large companies or the government. Now, 70% of them want to go work for startups. Or the IITs in India. What you saw in Stanford was 7,000 people. They graduate more startups than any other university in the world that then become unicorns, billion-dollar valuations or bigger. The IITs in India, it started with one, and I actually invested in the number 3 company they graduated over a decade ago. They now do 100 a year in one IIT. Then they're doing it across all 13 of them. So I think it comes back to the universities have to be the hubs. Young people want to hang out around the universities. They like the activity. They like the social life. And so I believe that the startups at first will be right university based. And then as you expand it out and you bring it to this outdoor life that West Virginia has at the perfect time to do this, then you can expand throughout the whole state. So I think our state is tailor-made to make a transition now. If we have the courage to go do it and the courage to realize we're going to fail and we're going to get second guessed, periodically along that way. But if France can do it, Lord knows West Virginia can do it.
Yeah. I think it's, again, what gives us a lot of hope is hearing you speak about it, then hearing even the investment that Brad's made with Intuit did in the south part of the state to create the state center there. So there's definitely an infrastructure being built to take advantage of this and really try to capture that workforce and perhaps refocus it in different areas. That was a question for Tyler Dinsburg because I didn't mention his name. I just wanted to make sure that he knew it was his question. But there is a question also. We talk about startups, and you have talked about the differentiators of the state and our culture, our how closely we're working together, the outdoors, the water. When you think of the areas in which these startups could happen or which ones are the most likely to succeed, Mary Cook is asking us, what category of startups are you thinking of? Is it only disruptive tech? Is it small businesses as well? What are your thoughts? When we say startups, can you narrow it down to a little bit of categories?
So it's a great question because we have to be successful in our first wave of startups. And so then it goes back to what startups are a natural extension out of West Virginia. And I think it has to do with the outdoor lives that people want to live and the activities that people want to do. And I think it also has to do with areas that might be unique to our state with how we're dealing with some of the health and the aging issues as well. And then I think if you develop the education right, what Marshall and West Virginia does is teach our young people how to learn. So once you get them going, then they can learn other areas. But we also have to educate everybody on technology. You don't have to program. I'm not a big believer in that. But you do have to understand how you use the Zoom technology to change your model. You do have to understand how do you apply that to marketing, to advertise your small startup, to come to West Virginia and we can take you on a rafting trip that no one else can do, or take you on a trail hiking that no one else can do, or you can be located in a given location and within 25 miles have more whitewater activity or biking activity than you will anywhere else. And if we get the infrastructure right. So I'd play to our natural resources. I'd play to the education, i.e. medical type opportunities. And then I'd watch for the wild cards, because sometimes things you think have no chance at all become very mainline. I'm an investor in a cricket company, farming of crickets. And when I originally met the CEO, he won one of the top startups in the world for the environment, and he was brilliant. And he said, "John, will you invest and spend time?" And I said, "Of course not. I know nothing about crickets." And why? Well, it's the most pure form of protein you can get at 1/10 the damage to the environment that agriculture or farming of meat products provide. And you can do it on a scale that could cure hunger. And you could also make crickets the next lobster. So I had to try. And by the way, we almost failed 3 times, very close to not making payroll. But they crossed the chasm now. And with government working with them, they are now located in Austin, Texas, and in Canada, and they're building out $20 million plants, and they're going to cookie cut them to manufacture, quote, crickets. So what I'm sharing with you is part of it played to the natural resources and the skills, the uniquenesses we have as a state in mining and in terms of the engineering skills we have. But part of it is just to create an environment where people can dream and then say, how are you different on it? But again, it has to be a unique combination of universities, venture capital, changing the curriculum, creating the right environment from a state government perspective, that we knock down the roadblocks and make it real easy to form a corporation. Yeah, and right now, California is really struggling. It's a hard place to do business. We are going to go the way of Boston 128 if we're not careful, because we have so many regulations and so many hurdles that were well-meaning, but it can really slow a company down. And so I think the more government and business can work together to remove roadblocks and really entitle and make it easy to form companies, the better we are too. So those would be where I would look. But it's really your students, when they come to you with a gleam in their eye and they say, this is what I want to try, and it makes sense, and they understand how they're going to differentiate it. And you've got to be differentiatable. If you're just trying to do what others have done, you're not going to be successful. And then we've got to run with a couple of them and get some wins.
And that's very interesting, because you mentioned India, you've mentioned efforts in France, and it seems to be that in both cases, one of the reasons of why this worked is because there was the government alignment to set up the stage, but there was also the engagement of the universities and the research centers with their students.
Yes.
So that definitely seems to be a road for success.
Well, this is why it's a little bit different what we're trying to do versus what Steve Case is doing or others. When I looked, without exception, all the startups that I acquired at Cisco and all of them that I'm currently invested in were formed really close to leading universities, where the universities focused on entrepreneurship and differentiation and creating that. And you combine that with supportive government to the point you made, that's a pattern, and pattern recognition is what I try to do in life that I think can be replicated very well. And that's why it's different. So what are we doing that's different? It is the most united front I've ever seen in any state in the nation. Doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter whether you're in the Senate or the House. Our U.S. senators, the great presidents of our 2 universities that are, I think, going to be at the core of leading us through this. That's different than anybody else's playbook.
And again, you went back to playbook, and as we know, COVID will pass. We'll go through this, but there's lessons learned. As you've said, we're more the result of our mistakes than of our successes. What should we learn from this? What advice do you give us for the future and really paint. You did it in '95. You painted a picture of the future for the world.
Yes.
What's that future now?
Well, the first one is don't be afraid to fail. And like most leaders, I like to talk about things that we did right at Cisco or we're doing right in my startups. But it's important to understand I'm probably more a product of how I handle my setbacks and my challenges. And just to give your audience an idea, you can imagine what it would be like if you were the most valuable company in the world, which we were at Cisco in terms of market capitalization. And we won every award there was to win, including all the corporate social responsibility awards. So we were not just economically successful, we were also really good at giving back to society. And I think that's the way it should be. And we created 10,000 millionaires among our employees that we grew from 400 employees to over 75,000. But I had setbacks that were near life-threatening for my company. And Jack Welch said, John, you're never going to have a great company, and do you have a near-death experience? And it was 2001 for me, the tech.com bubble. And we were the most valuable company in the world going into that for a short while. And I kept doing things the right way too long. I'd become too dependent upon my numbers, my orders, being able to give a very accurate indication of what my business would be next quarter, the quarter after, et cetera. And it never failed me for 10 years. But I failed to feel the market change on me and to prepare for it the right way. And we took a huge drop. People were questioning, and fairly so, should I even be running the company? And at the end of 2001, Jack Welch called me up and he said, John, you now have a great company and you're finally a great leader. And I said, Jack, it doesn't feel like it. I've let down my employees, my shareholders. He said, no, this was your best leadership year ever. And it really sunk in. I said, you're going to be the only one that ever tells me that. And by the way, he was. But the point that I'm making is how we handle our setbacks really position us for our successes. So what I really want to challenge the group is don't think incrementally now. Let's have the ability to dream together. Let's have the courage that we're going to feel along the way, but realize our power as West Virginians is we can come together in a way that almost no other state can. And there's nothing that we can't accomplish together if we don't care who gets the credit. And so I really think now is the time for us to get outside our comfort zone, each of us to determine what is your cricket bet you're going to make. In other words, way outside your comfort zone, and have the courage to dream and then really publicize and market our dreams when we start to hit some successes, which I think we're going to do.
Thank you, John. I mean, I think we're coming to the top of the hour, and I know we would like to continue to just ask you as many questions we can get, because getting access to your global vision is really such a treat. But I did want to say a couple of words. It's just your engagement with WVU. It's not only with WVU, it's with West Virginia. I feel honored to lead the college that bears your name and have you as a partner in everything we do. But if you could tell us a little bit of what is your role and Brad Smith's role and Ray Lane's role that you're playing right now, so people could understand that kind of engagement. How is this being played and how you see it yourself?
Well, it's much like a sports team. You've got to have a whole bunch of combination of different skills that come together. And then you've got to have a couple visionaries who help put that what's possible together on it. And so I think when you talk about Brad or Ray or myself, we've seen this movie 100 times. We know how startups can grow. We know how it ties back to education. And I've made every mistake there is to make, or at least it feels like it. So we know some of the things that could trip us up. And what we also have learned is you have to paint the picture for 3, 5, and 10 years out. And you paint the picture both positive, but you also paint the picture negative. If we don't change, here's going to be the outcome. In hindsight, that's what I did not do at the West Virginia Business Summit in the middle of the 1995, 98 timeframe. I should have done a better job of saying, if we don't change as a state, we're going to get left behind. But I didn't have the experience as much at that time. So you've got 3 executives who've been there and have seen it. All 3 of us have been very fortunate in life, and I believe those that are most fortunate owe an obligation to give back, and all of us are giving back both financially as well as time and energy on it. And so I would kind of think of us as your technology startup visionaries who are there and will help through a combination of everything from scholarships to dreams on how the business school could change to an ability to build an ecosystem, much like we've seen work here in Silicon Valley to make these dreams come true. And the three of us, we're not afraid of failing. We've also, all three of us have learned we can bring down giants. There's nothing more fun than taking on the biggest and beating them. So I wish I wasn't quite so competitive. I think Brad and Ray are as well. So I think that's what we bring.
And I think you're much too modest to also say it, but there's also that you have people like you, people like Bob Reynolds, people like Brad Smith, people like Ken Kendrick. I mean, even many more people that we know closely in Charleston with someone like Marty Becker. The engagement that our alumni through our university has brought, I think it's incredible. And it happens with Marshall, my good friend, Abhi Mukherjee, the Dean of the Smith School of Business.
Yes.
We're seeing that kind of connectivity through our alumni. And one thing that we have, I think, all responded to a call that both President Gilbert and President Gee have made is we want to bring West Virginians back. And you've seen the outcome of one of those great investments that happened because of your support was to bring Sarah Biller back and help us bring that talent and that mindset to really help us change the state. So I just wanted to use this platform to mention to everyone out there that a lot of people want to come back home. A lot of people want to make West Virginia their home, sometimes again. And people like you, John, like Brad, and all the alumni network that we have, including, again, like someone like Bob Reynolds, who gave us a great way to start our new dream for the business school and our new home. It has really helped us change how we're attracting talent back and retaining talent in the state. And I think it's what we need to be able to continue to dream and land those big planes that we have put on flight.
Completely agree. The bottom line is West Virginia is open for business, open for job creation, open for startups, open for making innovation and dreams come true. And if we do it right, we're going to do it in a way that no other state could, with a single united vision for the future.
Yeah. Well, Steve, back to you. I don't know if you have closing remarks, and I hope this was what you and everybody attending wanted to see today.
This exceeded anybody's expectations, and our expectations were high to begin with. So very deep and sincere thank you, not only from me, but on behalf of all of the people who have joined this call and all of the West Virginians who are really getting a vitamin pill, I think, of new energy and a burst of new excitement and vigor, an adrenaline rush to get us moving. I took a lot of notes here. I won't go over them, but I thought a lot of wisdom was shared, and I look forward to writing all of this up and making it available to a larger audience. We will, for the benefit of those who are listening, for the benefit of those of you who did such fine, made such great presentations today, we will be capturing this presentation and making it available to a much wider audience. And I know the level of interest is very, very high. I also know that both of you are very, very busy people. Our hope is to have John Chambers come back and do this again. Maybe if I stay on schedule, we have a better chance of getting John because he is such a busy guy. So deeply, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for your love and affection and care for West Virginia and for what you are doing for our state and for the vision you are providing us from which we will take great lessons and be energized. Thank you deeply.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much. Deeply honored.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I think that's a wrap then.
Have a good day, Javier.
Have a good day, John. Thank you.
Have a good day, all.
Have a good day, Steve. Be safe.
You too, John. You too. Javier, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.